Hey, welcome everybody, and welcome property noodlers, and welcome wannabe wholesalers. Welcome all to the Wholesale Real Estate Investing by SAHA, number 213 on this, what is this, the 18th day of the new year, 2016, Negotiation New Op Day, the day that we get into the Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, because relationships, people, how you talk to, how you handle people is a huge, huge part of your success. So with that, hey, I'm Paul. Remember, in the there on the sign, in case you're wondering what that is, and or not on the sign, on the wall, on the map there, on the sign, and so let us know who you are. Let us know where you're hanging out from. Type it in on your keyboard. We always like to know who's hanging with us and what's going on, where you're at, and what part of the world you're in. And with me here today is, of course, my business partner, John Leister. How you doing, John? Where are you hanging from?
I'm doing super, Paul. Thanks. I'm hanging from Phoenix, Arizona. Glad to be part of these New Op Day hangouts. You know, I say this every New Op Day. This is one of my favorite days of the week because it's the start of a whole new session. We have the opportunity to get this thing rolling off right. And what better way to start a session by jumping onto a hangout with Paul and I, talk about real estate, go in, as Paul mentioned, and leave some comments, maybe some questions for us or comments about where you're hanging out from, and maybe some things you'd like to see us talk about on future hangouts. You know, I'm a believer that energy is everything, mindset is everything. So for me, I love doing these hangouts and being here each New Op Day because it builds momentum for the week. It builds energy for the week. And one of the reasons why we chose to discuss this particular book, the How to Win Friends and Influence People, and turn New Op Day into a discussion about this book and the concepts here is because to be successful in wholesale real estate, you need to find wholesale deals. And in order to find wholesale deals, you're going to have to work directly with the sellers, typically those that are in motivating situations that cause them to be in a position that they need to sell. It's not that they want to sell their property and that they're going to fish for some offers and list it with a realtor and wait for a big number to come in. No, they need to sell. But just because they need to sell doesn't mean they're going to sell to you. You still have to win you have to be able to influence and win their favor. So that's why we talk about this book on New Op Days, because these people skills are critically important to being successful in wholesaling. And not only that, they're critically important skills to be successful in life, successful in relationships with your spouse, your children, your potential future spouse, if you want to have children, all that stuff. And not only in dealing with these customers or these sellers of homes, but these are skills that Paul and I use each and every day in our business dealings. We got to win friends and influence the investors and our vendors and the people that we engage on a daily basis. So what better way to start a session but by discussing those very things that are contained in this book. So with that, I'm going to throw it back over to Paul. He'll kind of catch us up to speed and bring us to where we're at, and we'll continue going through this very important manual on how to win friends and influence people.
Well, and like everything that you just said really all comes down to one fact, and that's the fact that people don't really buy a product or service for the features or the benefits or anything like that of the product and service. At the time of purchase, what people are buying, you know, in 90%, 90 to 10% ratio, what they're buying is the person from whom they're buying it from. So what they're buying is you more over than what you're offering. You know, anybody can go out there in wholesale real estate and offer to buy a property, you know, close fast, any condition, all those things. You know, anybody can go out there and do that. And, you know, you're just another Joe Schmo in the long line of, you know, we're offering this right here. So what sets you apart? Why are these people going to sell to you? Are you making the best offer? Is that really the only thing? You know what? It's not. We've bought properties from people that have had better offers, and it's because they like us, not because they like the offer. So there's a huge, huge reason why this stuff is so important. It's because people are out there and they're going to do business with somebody whom they know, feel like they know at least, like, feel like they like at least, and trust, feel like they trust at least. And these concepts in this book give you the ability to impress that upon people in their own minds in a way that they themselves feel like they know, like, and trust you, and that they're willing to do business with you. And that's the bottom line right there. So chapter 3 is where we are in part 2 of the book here today, and it is, if you don't do this, you are headed for trouble. So if you don't do this, you're headed for trouble. And it's very, very simple, another very simple concept, but another very, very powerful one. And I'll tell you straight up right now, one that I myself have been a huge failure at for most of my life. And it is, looking back, reflecting upon it, something that I can see as a big wow, an aha moment as to, why a lot of things in my life were like they were prior to about, 4 years ago. So basically the book starts out talking about a little story about a little boy named Jim, whose father was killed by a horse one day. And this guy, never saw a high school, never went to college, of course. He never even graduated probably middle school or elementary school. I don't know how far he went, but he didn't go very far. And here this guy, before he was age 46, 4 colleges honor him with degrees, and he's become the chairman of the Democratic National Committee and Postmaster General for the United States. And when, this guy interviews this man named Jim Farley, he says, he asked him, well, what's the secret of his success? And Jim Farley says, hard work. And the interviewer says, come on, don't be funny. So, Mr. Farley said, then he asked me, what I thought was the reason for his success. And the interviewer replies, well, I understand that you can call 10,000 people by their first names. And he says, no, you're wrong. I can call 50,000 people by their first names. And make no mistake about it, this is what, helped this Jim Farley guy propel President Roosevelt to the White House. And this book goes on. What's great about this book is it really relates actual stories of what he's talking about here, people who utilize these concepts and make these things part of their daily lives and the success that they achieve from them. And, this Jim Farley, he talks about President Roosevelt in here, who gets a car delivered to him because he was kind of handicapped and crippled up. He has this special car that he can drive with, without the use of his legs. Basically, it's all hand stuff. And this guy comes out to deliver the car, and he brings a little mechanic with him. And this mechanic is just kind of there and, points out a couple of things that the salesman, so to speak, sort of asked him to show Mr. Roosevelt, and this, that, or the other thing. And they only had a very brief little introduction or whatnot. But at the end of this whole, few hours of, examining this car, and, the main guy, explaining everything and showing out everything, and having the little mechanic guy, throw in a word or two here and there about, some more specifics about how things work and whatnot. At the end of it all, Mr. Roosevelt turns to the mechanic himself and, thanks him, calls him by his name, thanks him very much for him coming out here, doing all these things. And just that whole, this guy is like, he doesn't think he's anybody here. He's just some little, just some guy who's there to throw in a few tidbits of facts. And the next thing you know, here the President of the United States is acknowledging him in person by his name and making him feel important. And that's really what this chapter is all about.
Right. That's exactly what this chapter really drives home a very simple point, that is, you should develop, right, a quote from the book, develop an uncanny ability for remembering people's names. That's what Jim Farley did, which is what gave him so much success. And really one of the things that made the President Franklin Roosevelt so popular amongst people is his ability to recall their names. A name is the most, to a person, their name, the average person feels that his or her own name is probably one of the most interesting things. One of the, you know, one of the things that make them feel most important is to hear someone call them by, you know, call them by name. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I love how this book just, as Paul said, relates these real life stories to show examples of how this stuff really works out there. I'm just going quickly through the last couple pages here that Paul went over because I have a bunch of stuff underlined. And I just want to see why I have it underlined. Was it that important at the time I read the book? Probably. Yeah. Here about Jim Farley being the traveling salesman, and he built up a system for himself for remembering people's names. And whenever he met a new acquaintance, he found out his or her complete name and some facts about his or her family, business, and other political opinions. You know, why would you ask, hey, what's your name? So tell me about your family. Tell me about this. You know, these are very simple things to do that'll make people really like you and feel comfortable. Why? Because it shows them you care. It shows them you have concern. You know, for me personally, when I meet somebody and I introduce myself and we have what I feel to be a good conversation, and the next time I see that person, or maybe even by the end of the conversation, they don't remember my name, I on a subconscious level, and I don't let it grip me too much because I know that most people really, quite honestly, suck at this. As Paul said, majority of people out there suck at remembering and recalling names. You ever hear people tell you, oh, I can't remember, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. I always remember faces. You know, on a subconscious level, really think about it. When someone doesn't remember your name, and you felt like you've had a good conversation with this person, it actually is it insults your subconscious. It tarnishes you a little bit, whether you realize it or not. But if you have the ability to remember someone's name and you call them by name during conversation, or if you write them a personalized letter, you know, you start off with Dear Bill or Dear Jane, or, you know, whoever you're writing the letter to, it goes a long way. It creates a bond of familiarity. It's very important, just a very important, simple concept.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? And the interesting thing about this, I mean, the whole this chapter. Oh shoot, what happened? My page flipped over. I got lost here. Okay, here we go. Yeah, this chapter, the principle in this chapter, the basic principle in this chapter is remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Okay, that's how big, you know, that's what's in a name. That's how big it is to you as a human being. I mean, you might not even think your name means that much to you, but it does. It means huge. It means everything to you. The interesting thing about what John was just saying there is, you know, in reality, and I was this person, and still, I mean, this is a hard thing, really. This is one of the harder things in my mind to become successful at doing, is remembering people's names, because you know what? A lot of people, most people have forgotten your name before you finish your first sentence. When you get into a conversation with someone and, you know, oh, you know, somebody new, whatever, and it's like, oh, hey, you know, maybe you're at a networking event or something, and someone's like, oh, hi, how are you doing? My name's so-and-so. And you're like, oh, nice to meet you, so-and-so. My name's Paul. And they'll be like, oh, hi, Paul, nice to meet you. What do you do? And you'll be like, oh, you know, I do this, that, or the other thing. This is my 30-second commercial. By the time you finished your 30-second commercial, that person there's a high probability that person's already forgotten your name. and you know, so you'll have this conversation, might go on for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. This guy doesn't even have, he's got no clue who you are or what your name is. And then at the end of that conversation, you know, always, oh, I'm sorry, you know, what was your name again? You know, was he even listening to anything else he said? You know, he didn't hear the very first thing out of your mouth, the very most important thing to you, your name. Can't remember what that is. How does that person feel about you at that point in time? You know, and I like I like the little system that Jim Farley put together in here. And whenever he asked anybody his name, he would just, you know, basically kind of give them probably kind of half BS, you know, kind of a, you know, oh, what was that again? I didn't quite catch how you said that. And then once they say it, you know, especially if it's a name that's a little bit differently, you know, oh, how do you spell that? And have them spell their name. So now they've told you their name, they've repeated their name to you. Now they've spelled your name. Now they've spelled their name to you. You got their name into your mind 3 times in your conversation right there. There's a much higher probability that you're actually going to be able to remember that name throughout the conversation. And when it comes time to close, be able to call this person by their name. And the other feature to that little system was, of course, during the conversation to make sure that you actually use their name and call them by name. When you're in the middle of the conversation, so that again, by the time you reach the end of the conversation, you can still remember and call them by their name. That's going to make a huge difference from the person who, has forgotten your name before you finish the first sentence, never uses your name once during a conversation, and then at the end has to ask you what's your name again because they couldn't remember it.
And the person feeling insulted, even maybe not to an extreme level of like, oh God, I'm so insulted, I hate this guy, but on a subconscious level, and that feeling will pass through because I know this to be true because I've experienced myself. It can be insulting, and as Paul said, then the person that you just talked to, that you're talking to, feels that maybe you weren't even listening to them the whole time. Shit, like. You can't even remember the first thing that was said to you. I like a little piece here in the book too. It shares a story about a sales guy named Sid who had a customer with the name Nicodemus Papadoulis. Nicodemus Papadoulis. And that's a rather difficult name to pronounce. And so most people referred to Nicodemus as Nick, and because it was easier to remember and simpler because it's more common. And most people just referred to Nicodemus as Nick. But Sid, made a special effort to remember his name. So during one of his sales calls one afternoon, he literally called him by his full name and, said to the guy, good afternoon, Mr. Nicodemus Papadoulis. And Nicodemus was shocked. For it seemed like several minutes, there was no reply from him at all. Finally, he said with tears rolling down his cheeks, Mr. Levy, in all the 15 years I have been in this country, nobody has ever made the effort to call me by my name. Think about how powerful that is. Like, if you make a special effort to remember the names of the people you're doing business with or working with, especially if you make a special effort, if it's a unique name that's difficult to remember, but you figure out a system for remembering it and then recall it, this is going to go a long way with getting people to like you and to have an influence over others and be a charismatic, good person, is to remember the names, the little things.
Especially that difficult name like that, when you can remember a difficult name like that and pronounce it properly. If he would just to say, hey, hi, Nikolai Papadoulio, that wouldn't have meant anything. But to say it actually properly, a difficult name like that, Nicodemus, I'm not looking at the name right now, but yeah, to say that absolutely the proper way that it's written and that it's pronounced, that makes a big difference too. It really shows that you care, is what it really shows. It shows that you care about the other person, to take the time to, do that the right way. Another story in here that I really like, and this is related more towards business. This is Andrew Carnegie and what's the guy's name? Pullman. I can't think of his first name here, but they were both vying for the sort of streetcar business, and they were just battling back and forth with each other. And then one day, Andrew Carnegie basically, calls a meeting with Mr. Pullman, and he sits down and he proposes that they, instead of fighting against each other, to create this business and everything and to be the kingpin and all that, they could do a lot better and be more successful if they were to combine their forces and go into business together and create this streetcar company. And Mr. Pullman, he kind of likes the idea and everything, but his one and only question to Mr. Carnegie basically is, well, what would we call the new company? And when Mr. Carnegie replies, why, the Pullman Palace Car Company, of course, Pullman's face brightens up. Come into my room, he says, let's talk this over. And, industrial history was made right then and there. But if he would have said, well, we're going to call it the Carnegie Classic Car Company, Pullman would be like, whoa, get the hell out of here. But he was a wise enough man to put his own pride aside for the success of the business, for the venture, for the making of something grand, and allow someone else's name to be put onto the name of the company, which is huge to this guy. And obviously, like I said, history's made.
Yeah, there's another little paragraph in this story about Andrew Carnegie where it talks about him wanting to sell steel rails to the Pennsylvania Railroad Company. And the president at the time was a J. Edgar Thompson. And so what Carnegie thought would be a good idea when he built a huge steel mill in Pittsburgh is he ended up calling it the Edgar Thompson Steel Works. And so who do you think Edgar Thompson, president of Pennsylvania Railroad, who do you think he wanted to buy, steel rails from? Well, Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie's a great guy. He named a factory after me. Just to show, like, that's one of the most magical things to a person is to hear their own name. I haven't read this chapter in a while, and I think it's going to get into this, but, people want to immortalize their name and their name to carry on and be remembered. That's brilliant right there. You want to get somebody's business, name your manufacturing plant after them. And what the hell? I mean, who wouldn't be excited about that? And that's not the word, but like complimented by that. So it's a huge compliment as well to remember. And then call that person by their name quite frequently. It sounds very, very, genuine and that you care.
It's an interesting thing in today's world, though. You'll notice if you go back onto, especially in a certain area here, but I'll come to that in a second. But you'll see that there's a lot of places, like you see, like John says, a lot of people want to have their name immortalized. They want to know that their name is going to be perpetuated on. And I don't know, maybe they get the feeling that they can't trust their families to do so, which quite honestly, if you look around, a whole lot of, wealth and greatness that was built by a lot of people has been destroyed by descendants of those people as time passes on. But so, you have like, libraries and museums and, all these great types of organizations, hospitals, whatever it is that, are named after a person. You'll see, and generally it's obviously, a person who pretty much kind of like donated the majority of the money to kind of make this thing happen, or at least a large part of the money to make this thing happen. And that's how they get their names on these things. But one thing that I know that I'm sure you've all noticed is quite something a little bit different in today's world is that you'll see a lot of these places, especially when it comes to sporting arenas, a lot of buildings and things like that, is that no longer are they being named after a specific person, but now it's a company, the Invesco sports field or the, this, whatever kind of a building, the Bank of America building, where, this used to maybe this building used to be the David Stewart building, but now it's the Bank of America building, and you see a lot of this happening. And so, that just shows you the power of a name, not only to a person, to a human being, but it goes so far as to extend off to an entity that people are actually wanting to put their business names onto these things and replace the name of the human being that used to be on there before. And that's the interesting thing too. These golf buildings, all of these, sports arenas used to be a person. Now they're all a business. Interesting concept.
And they're all owned by businesses too, most of these ballparks and arenas, and they name the arena or the ballpark after the name of the business. Like what? I'm not even sure where the Arizona Diamondbacks now play. I think is it Bank One Ballpark now or Chase Field? What the hell is it? I don't even know. It's some bank now.
Yeah, Chase Field.
Chase Field.
Mm-hmm.
You might be saying to yourself, man, how do you write an entire chapter that's about, 10 pages long on a simple concept of remembering a name? Well, not quite 10 pages, just about 7 or 8 on okay, I get it. Do you really get it? Are you creating a system and staying conscious of remembering people's names? Most people don't. Like Paul said, most people you're going to talk to, take notice of this, won't remember your name by the end of the first time you meet someone. The overwhelming majority of people will not remember your name by the end of the conversation. But if you're the kind of person that can figure out a system to train yourself to remember names, the first part of it is just being aware that go through your day today and make a conscious effort to go, everyone I meet today, I'm going to ask them their name. And if I didn't hear them, I'm going to ask them to repeat it. And then during the conversation, I'm going to use their names several times throughout the conversation and figure out a trick that's going to work for you to help you remember someone's name, like maybe a feature, a facial feature, or a mannerism they have, some way for you to kind of associate that name to that particular person, so that, because most of us have great facial recognition. So if you can pull a feature from someone's face or come up with a little rhyme to remember their name, so when you physically come into contact with that person again, just the sight of them ignites the memory of their name. And if it's a difficult name, make a conversation about the name. Oh, that's a unique name. What kind of name is that? What is it? Is it a French name, a German name, whatever? How do you spell that? Very interesting, Nicodemus. So anyway, and then pepper the conversation by using their name throughout it, and create a little system for yourself. It's a simple concept, but it's a powerful one. And this book, just these various stories that this book is sharing, is just giving examples of just how powerful that is. Because it's
so how does this apply to wholesale real estate? Well, imagine that you are on the phone or in person. Let's say you're on the phone even. When you're on the phone, you have a huge advantage, because what you have when you're on the phone is you have some of this right here and one of these right here. And when somebody tells you their name, you can actually just write it down, and then it's right there and you don't have to forget it. So if you're on the phone with somebody, make sure if you write only one thing down in the whole conversation, you write down their name, okay? But yeah, on a phone conversation, you've got the advantage of writing down. But you're talking to somebody in person. You got someone's house to knock on their door, and because you want to buy their house, and you're like, hey Joe, how you doing? Blah blah blah, and maybe he's you're there because however it goes. But if you use this person's name throughout the conversation, and maybe even use it a couple of different ways. Maybe you use it as a Mr. So-and-so. You also use it as maybe his full name. Hey, John Davis. In some way, shape, or form at time in the conversation. You'll see where and how you can kind of fit these in. And then also too, by their first name, just Joe or whatever it is, by using their name in a few different ways, it really makes the seller get this feeling of importance, like again, as though you care about them. Just because you're using their name, they get a sense of being able to that you care about them, that you've gotten to a point where you know one another, and that they can trust you, because just because you're using their name, you can build trust in another person, and that's going to go a long way towards getting that person to like you over seller number 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you to get that deal instead of somebody else.
Yes. And just to sum it up, I mean, the principle behind this chat. Oh shoot, my book closed. The principle behind this chapter is this simple. I want to read it verbatim from the book, and gosh, here we go. Just had it open there. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. And it's true, because I like to always pepper the conversations when I'm sitting in the house with a seller and use their name quite often, because I can see if I'm explaining to them a situation that they're in, and it's typically a bad situation that they're in, which is making them need to sell us the house, I can literally see people perk up a little bit when I use their name, and I look for those cues. So if I'm discussing something with somebody about the fact that they are, all right, you got a lot of debt against this property, you've got these unpaid taxes, the foreclosure with the bank, you haven't paid your HOA in years. You could see in that person's face that they're like coming to fully realize the shitstorm that they're in. And then I kind of say, but you know what, Joe, this is something that we can absolutely help you with. So, Joe, if we can help you solve these problems, that's something you'll be interested in. And it's like the minute you say, Joe, this is something I can help you with. I don't even get to, this is something I can help with. It's like they're looking down, they're feeling all depressed. And you say, Joe, and then they look up kind of like, oh, he just said my name so politely and nice. And their attitude sort of shifts. It just is something that's very pleasing for people to hear. And experience shows me that these techniques really do work and work well with what we're doing with wholesale real estate.
So the bottom line, again, the name of this chapter was, going back to it, if you don't do this, you are headed for trouble. If you don't remember someone's name that you're in a conversation with, you are headed for trouble. It's just that simple. The more powerfully you can build a system for yourself to remember other people's names. Here's an interesting thing. Here's a little concept. Let's just say you're at a real estate networking event, and you're going around the room and you're meeting a few people. Right now, there's a whole system to networking and whatnot too. But you've got let's say you've got a half an hour at the beginning of the event, and then you've got a half an hour at the end of the event, right? So you meet a couple of people at the beginning of the event. You meet Sue Smith and John Jones over here, right? And so then the event goes on, et cetera, and so on. And now the event ends, and you're back into the sort of networking area again. And you don't even have to have a conversation with these guys, just in passing. As you're heading towards, a conversation with somebody else, you might say like, oh, hi, Sue Smith. How did you enjoy the information tonight? Just a quick question in passing and on your way. And the fact that you, after that whole entire networking event and all these other people talking about all this very, very important stuff, was able to call that person by name and recognize her, that's going to make her feel very important and want to do business with you.
Mm-hmm. That basically kind of sums it up. I see it's 9:02. Remember people's names. Make it a habit. Create a little system and just do it, because especially if you're in sales and you want to win the influence and the friendship of the person that you're working with to share your product and service, you're going to want to remember that person's name and use it frequently and show them that, make them feel that they're important. So with that, unless Paul has anything to add in, I'll go ahead and just close this out with the Napoleon Hill prayer that goes, "Oh universe, I ask not for more riches, but for more wisdom with which to make better use of the riches given to me at birth, consisting in the power to control and direct my own mind to whatever ends I may desire." So with that, have a great day. Make a little game out of it today. Go out there. Remember the name of everyone you come into contact with today. Build a habit that'll make you millions.
All right, everybody. See you back here on Wisdom Wednesday.